They told you to love others, to forgive, to show compassion. But no one ever told you how to do that. When the enemy is inside you, there's a war that plays out silently within many of us. Between who we are and who we think we should be. Between the self we've hidden and the one we allow the world to see. Carl Jung called this battle the inner civil war. A war fueled by shame, by denial, by the refusal to accept what we fear within ourselves. But what if the enemy in your heart was never meant to be conquered, but embraced? What if peace doesn't come from silence, or strength, or control, but from sitting down with the most broken parts of yourself and saying, I see you. I'm staying. In this video, we explore how Jung's psychology and Zen wisdom can lead you to end the conflict within, and finally, come home to yourself. You don't have to look far to find the war. It's in the tension behind your smile. It's in the way you hold your breath when emotions rise. It's in the quiet shame you carry for being too much or not enough. And the hardest part? This battle isn't being fought outside. It's happening within you. Most people live torn between two selves. The one they present to the world, and the one they hide, even from themselves. You push away your anger. You bury your sadness. You silence your fear. And each time you do, you split a little more, dividing your heart into warring parts that fight for space, for expression, for love. Carl Jung understood this fracture deeply. He saw that healing wasn't about fixing what's broken, but about integrating what's been denied. He believed that peace comes not by destroying your darkness, but by making room for it. Zen masters, in their own language, pointed to the same truth. Suffering is resistance. Freedom is presence. You don't end pain by running from it. You end it by turning toward it, fully awake, and seeing what it's here to teach you. But here's where most people get stuck. They try to win the inner war by force. They try to overpower their anxiety with positivity. They try to suppress their rage with discipline. They try to drown out their sadness with distractions. It never works. Because anything you fight inside yourself grows stronger. You can't heal what you won't touch. You can't release what you refuse to feel. You can't become whole by rejecting your own pieces. Jung wrote something that changes everything. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. That's the moment the war begins to end. Not when you fight harder, but when you choose to understand. The parts of you that feel unworthy, ashamed, impulsive, selfish. They're not your enemy. They're your messengers. They carry the voice of your unmet needs, your buried pain, your forgotten stories. To ignore them is to abandon yourself. To listen is to come home. Zen teaches that there is no good or bad self. There is only the self that is seen, and the self that is not. And it's in that unseen place that your suffering grows. When you shine the light of attention, without judgment, you don't just see the shadow. You begin to understand its shape, its source, its cry. In this video, we're not going to give you steps to fix yourself, because you're not broken. We're going to walk together through the heart of the conflict, and show you that your peace was never waiting outside of you. It was always hidden beneath the layers of stories, silence, and self-rejection. This is not a path of ease, but it is a path of truth. And if you're willing to walk it, you may find that the enemy you feared inside you was actually the part of you that needed your love the most. Let's begin. If this speaks to something inside you, stay with me. Because what we're about to explore could change how you see yourself forever. What if the war inside you isn't asking to be won, but to be understood? At the center of most inner conflict lies a false idea that certain parts of you must be eliminated in order for you to be worthy. Your sadness, your jealousy, your rage, somewhere along the way, you were taught to view these emotions not as signals, but as defects. So you began to disown them. But the truth is, what you reject within yourself doesn't disappear. It waits, unseen, unheard, unresolved, until it finds a way to express itself. It might come out as anxiety, shame, avoidance, self-sabotage, or the sudden sense that no matter what you achieve, you still feel broken. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche where we place all the traits we don't accept in ourselves. Not just the socially bad ones, but even the soft, vulnerable, authentic parts we learn to hide in order to survive. And here's the paradox. The more we try to suppress these parts, the more power they gain over us. They start running the show from the background, unseen but deeply felt. This is where Zen offers a radical shift. Instead of fighting these parts or trying to control them, Zen invites us to simply notice. To become aware of what is arising, without naming it, judging it, or trying to change it. Awareness, in its purest form, is healing. Imagine for a moment that you're watching a storm from inside a quiet room. You hear the wind. You see the rain. You feel the thunder shaking the windows. But you're not running outside with your hands in the air trying to stop it. You're present, observing, allowing it to pass. That's what inner acceptance looks like. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. It's knowing that resisting your fear only strengthens it. But meeting it with stillness dissolves its grip. Jung once wrote, "The patient does not feel accepted unless the very worst in him is accepted too." And that applies to all of us, not just in therapy, but in how we relate to ourselves. Real transformation begins when you stop trying to exile the parts of you that hurt, and instead invite them into the light. But how do you do that? Start small. The next time you feel overwhelmed by an emotion, pause. Breathe. Don't label it as wrong. Don't rush to fix it. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now, not in words, but in sensation? Where in my body do I feel it? What would happen if I just allowed it to be here for a moment, without resistance? At first, this might feel unfamiliar, maybe even scary. But what you'll begin to notice is that your emotions are not trying to destroy you. They're trying to speak. And when you stop fighting them, you finally get to hear what they've been saying all along. Zen teaches that suffering isn't caused by the presence of pain, but by our refusal to be with pain as it is. When you bring that still, open attention to your inner world, you begin to see the outlines of your shadow, not as a threat, but as a misunderstood ally. Your anger, it might be the voice of a boundary that was crossed too many times. Your sadness, perhaps it's the grief of having lived so long disconnected from your true self. Your fear, maybe it's the echo of a time when you needed protection and had none. When you start to listen, you begin to integrate. And integration is the end of fragmentation. It's how you call your lost pieces back home. It's how you become whole again. This isn't about letting your emotions run your life. It's about no longer letting them run your life from the shadows. The moment you choose to meet your inner world with openness instead of judgment, the war begins to quiet. And that stillness you've been seeking, it's not something you chase. It's something that arises when the parts of you at war finally feel safe enough to lay down their arms. There's a silent story playing in your mind every day. One you probably didn't choose, but one you've learned to believe. It says, "I'm too much. I'm not enough. If people knew the real me, they'd leave." These aren't just thoughts. They're invisible blueprints shaping how you see yourself and how you live your life. Carl Jung understood that the stories we believe become the masks we wear. He called this the persona, an identity we build to function in society, to be accepted, to feel safe. But behind the persona lives the truth, the self we're afraid to show, the parts we've silenced, the emotions we've learned to hide. And that's where the inner war intensifies. Because eventually, the mask gets too heavy. The split between who we are and who we pretend to be grows wider. And in that gap, anxiety, shame, and disconnection begin to take root. Zen offers a different invitation. Instead of building a stronger mask, it invites you to remove it. Not to collapse into chaos, but to rest in what is real, beneath identity, beneath performance. To notice what arises when you no longer have to defend who you think you're supposed to be. But this isn't easy. Because those masks have protected you. They helped you survive. The part of you that became perfect, pleasing, or strong did so for a reason. To avoid rejection, abandonment, or pain. So the first step is not judgment, it's compassion. To say to those parts, "Thank you for protecting me. You were doing your best." Then, gently, ask yourself, what part of me have I exiled because I was afraid it would cost me love? Maybe it's the angry child who was never allowed to speak. Maybe it's the insecure teenager who still lives inside you, afraid of being seen. Maybe it's the vulnerable adult who wants to cry, but was taught to stay strong at all costs. Jung believed that what we suppress doesn't vanish, it becomes our fate. The more we deny a part of ourselves, the more it shows up unconsciously. In our relationships, our self-sabotage, our anxiety. The world becomes a mirror reflecting the war within. But the moment you acknowledge that story, truly see it, you open the door to something radical, the power to choose again. Zen doesn't try to overwrite the story with a better one. It simply invites you into the silence behind the story. Into the space where labels fall away and only awareness remains. And in that stillness, something shifts. You begin to witness the story, instead of being trapped inside it. You stop identifying with the voice that says, "I'm not enough," and start recognizing it as just that, a voice. A memory. A learned belief. Not your truth. You don't have to fix the story. You just have to stop letting it define you. The moment you do, your inner dialogue begins to change. Not because you forced positivity, but because you stopped feeding the illusion. Imagine speaking to yourself the way you would to someone you love. Not to correct them, but to hold space for their pain. To listen, without needing to rush to solutions. To remind them, you're allowed to be human. You're allowed to feel. And you're still worthy. This kind of inner relationship doesn't create weakness. It creates wholeness. Because when you're no longer fighting yourself, you free up energy to grow, to express, to connect authentically. The war begins to end when the one inside you who has been screaming for attention is finally heard. You may still feel discomfort, but you'll stop interpreting it as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, it becomes a reminder. There's something in me that needs kindness right now, not judgment. And over time, those small moments of presence, those pauses between reaction and awareness, become the very ground on which inner peace is built. You don't need a perfect version of yourself to be free. You just need a version that's finally willing to stop hiding. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from connection. Sometimes, it comes from separation. Not from others, but from the noise. In today's world, we are surrounded by constant distraction. Voices telling you who to be, what to feel, how to live. You scroll. You listen. You compare. You conform. But amidst all that noise, you begin to forget what your own voice sounds like. Carl Jung wrote that the individual who wishes to cure must first retreat into solitude. Not to escape the world, but to find themselves outside of it. To meet the parts that have been drowned in expectation, performance, and fear. This solitude is not loneliness. It is sacred space. It's where the false self begins to dissolve, and the truth of who you are rises gently to the surface. But this process is not comfortable. When you sit in silence long enough, the first thing that shows up isn't peace. It's discomfort. Old thoughts. Buried memories. The unresolved. And this is where most people turn back. Because they confuse discomfort with failure. But Zen teaches the opposite. Discomfort is the doorway. The storm that arises when you turn inward is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that something real is finally being seen. Jung spoke of the enemy within, the parts we label as selfish, weak, or broken, and reminded us that these are not flaws to be erased, but messengers from the unconscious that carry unmet needs, emotional truths, and forgotten strength. What you've been calling weakness might be the part of you that once needed protection. What you've labeled selfish may be the voice asking you to stop abandoning yourself. What you've rejected may be the very key to becoming whole. This is the paradox of healing. The thing you've run from the longest is the very thing that holds your freedom. Zen doesn't invite you to fix the shadow. It invites you to sit with it. Not to analyze it, not to argue with it, but to allow it. To breathe with it. To say, I see you. You belong. Because here's the truth. Whatever you refuse to accept within yourself becomes the source of your suffering. But the moment you say yes to it, not as permission for chaos, but as recognition of truth, you begin to integrate. Integration is not perfection. It's not about becoming a polished version of yourself. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to hide. And in that space, where judgment softens and presence expands, the war inside you begins to lose its fuel. You no longer need to fight your anger. You understand its root. You no longer collapse under sadness. You learn to sit with its message. You stop fearing fear itself. Because you realize it's just another wave in the ocean of your being, passing through. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are. Not by adding more, but by peeling away everything that isn't you. It's not about reaching enlightenment. It's about returning to authenticity. And the more you walk this path, the less effort it takes to feel at peace. Because peace no longer depends on fixing the world around you. It flows from within. You begin to move differently. Not because life got easier, but because your relationship to yourself is no longer adversarial. You speak softer to yourself. You pause before judging. You notice when old stories try to play out again. And this time, you choose presence over autopilot. And the most beautiful part? This internal shift doesn't just change how you feel. It changes what you attract. Your relationships deepen. Your boundaries strengthen. Your energy becomes clearer. Because when you stop being at war with yourself, you stop inviting war into your life. You've spent so long trying to fix yourself, trying to be better, calmer, more in control. But maybe that was never the answer. Maybe the goal was never perfection. Maybe it was peace. Not the kind of peace that comes when life finally goes your way, but the kind that stays even when it doesn't. The kind that rises not from winning the war inside you, but from ending it. Carl Jung taught us that true healing doesn't come from changing who we are, but from accepting all of who we are. And Zen wisdom echoes the same truth. That peace isn't something you find. It's what you return to when you stop trying to be anything else. So if you've been fighting yourself, if you've been running from the voice inside you, or burying the parts of you that feel hard to love, maybe it's time to pause. Maybe it's time to sit beside your sadness, to listen to your anger, to hold your fear without needing to change it. Because when the rejected parts of you are finally seen, the war ends. Not with force, not with resistance, but with presence. And in that stillness, you discover something unexpected. A quiet strength, a deeper truth, a version of you that no longer needs defending. You stop needing to be healed, because you've already begun to feel whole. So if no one's told you this yet today, you're not broken. You never were. You're simply remembering who you are. And the moment you stop fighting yourself, the whole world begins to change.